Hi, welcome to GalaxyCon Talks Comics. I am your host, Mike Broder, along with my co-host, Mr. Patty Hawkins. How you doing, Patty?
I am well, sir. How are you tonight?
You know, I am well as well. And tonight we have with us our special guest. He is the artist of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Serenity, The American Way. He's done work on Batwoman, Gambit, Age of X-Men, X-Tremists, Weapon X, and Deadpool. Industry veteran, has been doing this for quite a bit. Georges Jeanty.
Hey.
And I forgot to mention huge Planet of the Apes fan.
I am. I got some of the figures.
Mike has a few of those as well.
Well, yeah, Mike has an obscene amount, and it just puts everyone else to shame. So at this point, he's just bragging.
I don't know about that. You can go over with my action figures and dolls anytime you want. What you got there, Patty?
I literally just had this at the side. One of my gorilla soldiers.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry they didn't continue that. They were supposed to continue that series, and they never did anything else with it.
They were. I really wanted an astronaut Taylor figure.
Mm-hmm.
They did one, but the Mego style with the cloth, and Mike does cloth. I prefer hard plastic rubber clothing on my action figures. It's a taste great, less filling bone of contention among action figure collectors.
Hey, what you do with your action figures is up to you. All
and
right?
that line was frustrating because they only put out two of the cloth figures. They put out, the soldier ape, and they put out the Taylor figure, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I'm still waiting on my Mego sized, the rest of my apes.
Yeah.
In this world of plenty, I'm shocked they just don't do the whole cast. All of the other astronauts and other apes.
I was psyched for a shaven Charlton Heston figure because I was going to convert it into a Omega Man figure.
That would be interesting.
You just want to make a Soylent Green action figure, Patty. You can tell us.
That would have been the hat trick. If I got multiple ones of it too, it could have been. Yeah, it could have been the three faces of the dystopian Charlton Heston future.
Oh, honey, he rocks a fabulous scarf in that one. You need that one.
That's how you can tell too. It's just like, so this movie, Charlton Heston in the future was all shitty. Like, but I don't know what movie it was. Was he wearing a scarf? No, it was Omega Man. Was he wearing a scarf? Oh, that was Soylent Green.
Right. Was he half naked? Okay, that was Planet of the Apes.
The Apes, yes.
So Georges, something that me, you, and Patty all have in common.
Uh-oh. Can penicillin get rid of it?
I don't know. A lot of it, maybe. These are scars that don't heal. Roughly around the same time, we all worked for competing comic book stores.
Where did you? I know you, Mike, but where did Patty work?
I worked at the Comic Exchange in Sunrise.
Oh, shit. Really? I used to go there. Man, that was a trek because I lived in Miami Beach and, best friend. We would go all the way up there on certain weekends because that was a trek.
Okay, weekends was a good time to go because Monday through Friday, the guy at the register was a notorious comic book guy. Do not kick me off this stool unless you're paying in cash.
See, I'm old school because I started going to Sunshine Comics. You remember that? Remember with Joel? That guy Joel and his mother used to run the shop over in South Miami off of Bird Road.
I never made it to that.
This was the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, that was I rarely left Howard.
Joel was around until the last few years. He became a role-playing game store.
That's what I heard. I hadn't seen him, and I heard he sort of converted to role playing,
and his mother had passed, and so then his sister assumed the role of his mother.
Oh,
and he would just yell at her like he used to yell at his mom.
That store was never clean. Anytime I ever went in there, you couldn't find anything unless you were treasure hunting. Almost like what was the store right next to it? A&M Comics. Remember that going in?
A&M Comics.
Oh my God.
A&M is still around.
Yeah. I went, last time I went, I think I stopped by just for nostalgia's sake, and I swear to God, it was the same exact space that I saw 30 years ago when I was going.
I would believe that. Who's the guy in Miami that had the parrot?
Somebody had a parrot.
Yeah, there was a guy owned a shop because I read they did a story about him, like a grown man who sells comic books for a living, and yeah, I was just shot at him. He was an older beatniky looking guy. He had a parrot, and that was it. I never saw him at any of the shows. I never came. Yeah, because I stayed in Broward, so it was Comic Exchange, Bill's Comic Shop, and then the 30 or 40 guys who all opened up a store the week Superman died because they had more than 3 long boxes under their
Hey, don't talk about me like that.
Because they were all going to get rich off of the death of Superman. Well, you remember Bonnie was kind of a hippie. Remember Bonnie? She owned BAM before, and she was kind of a hippie chick. This might be before your guys, because this was before BAM. So this would have had to have been the early to mid 80s is when she had her store. That was in North Miami.
Man, I don't know.
But I'm sure all your listeners really don't care about comic shops in Miami.
So, you know what?
The point is, we were all bagging comics at one point about the same time.
Right. So at the same point in time in history, we're all bagging comics, except you decide you're going to get out. You decide bagging comics is not your life's dream. Your life's dream is to draw these damn things.
Well, you know, which is ironic because me and you remember Alex Gimetto, who had the shop, his life dream was to do music. And he started a band, and right now he's a pretty famous DJ. So, yeah, we would sit there just sort of lamenting on how great comic books are, but, you know, how much we felt stagnant just being here, selling, which, to be honest, I didn't mind. I loved the shop. And I'm very a people person, and I loved all, and I know you know this, Mike, all the eccentricities of people will make their way into a comic shop eventually.
Oh, yes.
And we had the gambit of crazies who were regulars who, I mean, we knew a guy who went around with a backpack, and he had a stuffed Alf in his backpack, and he would go everywhere with this thing. He would go into the supermarket, he'd do whatever. And he understood that this Alf was not real, but it gave him comfort. And literally, it's an overweight guy, balding, and he would
that narrows it down.
It was amazing. And that's just one. You know, there were so many. I swear to you, if I ever write a book on comic shops.
I won't mention his name, but did you ever get the guy who called himself a Marvel archivist?
No, archiving what? He just knew the history?
Warren, you're talking about Warren.
Yeah.
Warren used to drive around and come with you were telling the story about somebody with a backpack. I'm like, oh, he's talking about Warren, who would come in with his ragged copy of Marvel Mystery #1, Marvel Comics #1, and he would pull it out, and then he would just leave crumbs of it in your store. And he would have it, sometimes if you were lucky, he'd bring his King Kong script.
Yeah.
Oh, my, for the 30s.
Yes.
Yes.
That would be in the trunk of his car.
Yeah, but he really did have he told one interesting story about how he talked his dad into giving him $50 in 1968 so he could buy a copy of Fantastic Four #1.
Wow, for $50. Even then, it was
curious. Even then there was kind of a collector market going on.
And he worked for Marvel for like 50 seconds.
Oh yeah, doing what?
I think he like an assistant editor, archivist, like just kind of, you know, sometime in the early 80s. I think they reference him in some of those old Marvel ages.
Yeah.
Oh, and he was on the comp list.
Oh, hey,
for years.
You know you're important when you're on the comp list.
So Georges, you're working in the store. How do you get started as an artist? When did you make the decision you were going to become an artist, and how did that transition begin?
Man, I had the never-ending story of always trying to break into the business and just almost getting there. There was a guy locally who was doing these, I hate to say it, he was doing like these little sort of adult comics that he's like, oh, dude, I love your stuff. I really want you to do this. And I was always like, no, I don't know if this is what I want to be known for just coming into this business. And I started DC. I actually sent submissions to DC I probably got serious about it in 92, 93. And I sent some submissions to DC, and they were like, they actually wrote back, and somebody wrote in the corners, here, this is what's wrong, this is what you need to fix, and this is what you need to do.
Do you remember who?
I want to say Archie Goodwin was in charge of new talent at that time. And that's who had sent me a letter, and the little, my stuff was at least good enough to warrant sort of that big slash of markers on the page.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a form letter. And you're like, well, thank you very much. We hope you can submit later on, but we're going to reject this. Funny enough, I still have every rejection letter I ever had. I have one from Eclipse Comics. I have one from DC, from Marvel, from everybody who was prominent at that time.
Yeah.
I was there. So from there, I just wanted to, just do stuff. And finally, as you guys well know, because you talked to him last week, Jim Shooter was in town for a convention in Miami for a convention. And somebody who was going to do one of his books had pulled out, and he needed somebody that weekend. He needed to have found somebody that weekend, because when he went back to New York, he needed to have this book, Dogs of War, in place and ready to go. And he just saw something in my work. I did some submissions for him, and he saw something in my work that, hey, if you're serious, I will give you this job. You're not the best artist. He was honest too. He's like, you're not the best guy, but if you're serious and you can give me 22 pages in such and such time, this job is yours. And that's what happened.
Again, if you can make the deadline, that's
so much
half the job.
So much of this business is probably 20% talent and 80% dedication. You really have to be disciplined.
Mm-hmm. You remember what show that was?
Oh man, that was in Miami. It was like a one-time thing. It was in a weird place. It was in Miami, one of their little convention centers, not too far from downtown Miami. There was never a show there again, I don't think.
I want to say I'm vaguely remembering Jim Shooter being in town.
Yeah, this would have been 92, 93, somewhere around there.
Yeah. I want to say I do vaguely recall this. And this was,
because I also got a job at that time for another company, Caliber. Remember Caliber Comics?
Oh, yeah.
I got a job with them, and they were just starting a superhero line. So they needed artists because the whole Image thing was taking off, and they wanted to have their version of Image Comics. So they were like, hey, if you can keep the deadline, you're good enough to actually draw. If you can actually do this and keep your deadlines, we'll give you a job. So
what
I don't know
was that.
I could never pronounce the damn book forever, but it was called Paradigm from Caliber Comics. The guy doing it was a guy named Brent Carpenter, and he was starting this whole line of superheroes called the UN Force, the United Nations Force. So there were superheroes from every walk of the world, and this Paradigm was an offshoot, was sort of a covert ops group from this UN force. So at the time, he actually had a pretty broad spectrum of what he thought comics would become. And unfortunately, Caliber was so small, they really couldn't afford to compete. And again, this was at the time when, McFarlane and Silvestri and everybody's doing their own stuff. So any small guy is just getting lost in the shuffle because you don't draw like Rob Liefeld or, McFarlane or somebody like that. And then there was my Dalliance with a Double Impact. That was always good.
Yes. For those who don't know, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Double Impact was?
Well, Mike, I think you could tell the story better because I was always on the peripheral. I never really got in, but Jude Millian always sort of said, hey, I'm trying to get you to do a cover, or here, ink this so that they can see you can actually do something. But Ricky was so into his group and what his thing was. He loved to party, but when it came to business, he was like, well, I don't know, man. We'll see. We're still doing this and we're doing that, so we'll see.
So two guys in Miami, John Uella and Ricky Carawaya, right? So Ricky did the art and John wrote it with Ricky. And they did this book, Double Impact, which was at the height of the bad girl, thing.
Okay.
And I mean, so they do this book, but somehow they figured to do the chromium thing.
Well, that's just it. Their book was, I believe, one of the first chromiums ever put out. So it was a huge gamble whether or not it would work. And for their luck, it did, because everybody wanted this new thing called chromium.
And so they were these gorgeous chromium process on these not so gorgeous comics, but people ate that stuff up. I had my store at the time because I had my own shop, and there was a huge demand for that stuff, and those books were going for, money. And it was hot. It was hot in every sense of the word, and they were not good books, but people wanted to read, books about these two naughty girls who had big guns and big breasts that were going around blowing things up. And, they ended up having action figures.
Yeah.
Oh, did they?
Yes.
No, I didn't see that.
And then they did crossovers with like things like, you remember that book, Helena?
Yeah.
There was
Didn't
that
they do
other
a London Night crossover too at some point?
I'm sure they did. And
I'm pulling up a copy of the chromium cover. I'm going to send it to our producer.
That was something too. I talked to Ricky one night, and he told me he actually mortgaged his house on the idea that this was actually going to go over, because at that time, in order to get a chromium cover, you had to order something like 50 or 100,000 copies.
Right.
It was an insane amount because it had to justify the cost of the chromium at that time. And he did. He apparently mortgaged his house, and it was a gamble, but obviously
they made a lot of money on that book. John has told me many, many stories about that because he's still down here in Miami. Now he's got Creature Entertainment where he's, still trying to put out books. But they did those covers with the nude covers where you had to cover up it was everything that was wrong with 90s comics.
Yeah.
Everything that was wrong with 90s comics.
Well, they were taking the whole bad girl element to its like ultimate conclusion, where all we're doing is just pornography. So let's not be as subtle anymore. So they got a little more daring with every publication.
So, all right. So you do Dogs of War, you do Paradigm, you do some work for London Night.
Yeah. Well, that was the big thing. I think that was the big shift for me. I was doing Dogs of War and Paradigm here in Miami at the time. And finally, my friend Jude Millian was, and I know, Mike, you know him too.
Yes.
He was working with Everett Hartsoe over at London Night Studios, who was doing Razor, another bad girl book, something called Strike, another bad girl book. And they were doing pretty well for a small company. And Jude was up in North Carolina where Everett lived, in Hickory. And he kept saying, hey, man, if we can get you up here, I can get you work. And Jude was Everett was very big on, if you can move up here, I can guarantee you work, essentially. So, my 22 or so year old self was like, okay.
Oh,
it
wow.
was just like the Beverly Hillbillies. I packed up everything I had in a U-Haul. I had my car, and I just drove up to Hickory, North Carolina, of all places.
Wow.
Just the name resonated to me. Like stuff of clan rallies, or just there wouldn't be any ethnicity whatsoever. That was my biggest fear. But I went up there and did. I hung out, and I did it for a year. And I have to say, for all of the bad stuff that happened there, it did give me a leg up to say, hey, look, it got you out of Miami, and it got you sort of noticed in this industry, because Everett was very big on doing a lot of shows. We would drive to Cincinnati. Obviously, we'd do Heroes, which was down in Charlotte.
Right.
And we'd just do a bunch of shows. And I met a bunch of people from there. And I kept in touch with a couple of artists and publishers. Chris Warner, he was at Dark Horse for a little while, who was an artist. He was very interested in my work. Dave Johnson ended up becoming a good friend. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm a big Chris Warner fan.
Yeah. He was
American is one of those books that's fallen through the cracks, and that guy just made Chris Warner and to Mark Verheiden.
Mark Verheiden, yeah, who I met. Funny, I did a show in Paris, and he was there, and I just bowed to him, and he's like, "Oh my God, you even remember The American?" I'm shocked.
I love that book.
I know. Well, he's doing movies now, so he's sort of left the whole comic stuff behind. He actually was one of the producers on that new Swamp Thing. which was more the current stuff he was doing. But yeah, so it gave me the opportunity. I met, God, man, talk about names from the past. We hung out with JJ North. Remember JJ North? She was a sort of an actress or a scream queen when scream queens were like a big deal. Yes. I hung out with, we had dinner. Me and Brink Stevens had dinner, and we were seriously talking about doing a book together. So I had a lot of opportunity. Carmen Electra, we actually did a book with Carmen Electra back then. So I don't begrudge London Night anything, because it really did give me a leg up. But I can tell you, for every one person who had a great time at London Night, there were 10 people who were like, that dude still owes me money. I swear I better never see Everett again in my life.
Man,
there's something to be said about, look, when you're young and you want to get into something, you sometimes, make the deal with the devil. Knowing that, at the end of the day, you might be owed a few dollars, but you get your foot in the door.
Thankfully, I didn't have to sell all of my soul when I did it.
You got paid in exposure bucks, kid.
Exactly.
But you got some mileage,
I did. That was the important thing.
Yeah, and I lament that we don't have those small presses anymore, because it was a place where guys like you at your age could really start to get the kinks out. So that Marvel and DC would come to you. You wouldn't have to go to them.
Exactly. And the beauty of that is your first published work, which I don't know any artist who likes anything he's done initially. All that first stuff is always like, oh, I cringe. So if you're on this new X-Men book, you're probably exposing about 100,000 to 200,000 copies to all these people, whereas me and my first exposure at the small company was maybe about 30,000 copies. So thankfully, my first works that I loathe artistically, I very rarely see.
But think about, but Georges, think about that. You made a really important statement, and Patty, you said, oh well, there's not these companies to start small anymore. Well, there is, except the problem is that now it's 1,000 copies, 1,500 copies. Georges, you're talking about 30,000 copies on your first book where you got, your sea legs. Mm-hmm. There are many Marvel and DC books and Image books that don't sell 30,000 copies right now.
Yeah,
I agree. So, go ahead.
Your initial work was seen by more people than are reading, I don't know, Batgirl right now.
No, I can further emphasize that, because when I started doing Gambit, they canceled Gambit because it only sold about 40 or 50,000 copies. And this was at a time where X-Men was selling 1 million copies and things like that. So they were like, anything that sold below a certain line, which was about 40,000 copies, they just canceled it outright.
Now, could you imagine that today?
I know, right? They wish for those numbers.
Yeah. And they're canceling books that are selling 6,000 copies now.
I will say I was very, very proud, as sort of a new proud papa would be, when I did Buffy and the first issue actually went over 100,000 copies. I was like, yes, finally I can say that in my career.
So you go from London Night. Where's your next stop along the path?
From London Night, I stayed there a year, and I stayed there about a year. So in 12 months, I actually did about 10 books. So I was working pretty diligently.
That's good.
Yeah. After that, London Night basically imploded, and I left. I was friendly with Dave Johnson, who at the time was famous for the Super Patriot over at Image Comics, and he was drawing with. He had just left this company called Gaijin, where Adam Hughes and Brian Stelfreeze and Jason Pearson and a bunch of other really great artists of their time. Dave had bought a house up in Rome, Georgia. He was going to convert his he had a cabin, a farm cabin, and he was going to convert it into a studio. And he said, well, come on up. I can't give you work, but I will certainly call people on your behalf. And of course, I didn't have anything in Hickory, and I certainly didn't want to stay in Hickory. So again, Beverly Hillbillies song cuts in, and I packed up all my stuff and moved over to Georgia and to another very small town in a very southern rural white state, interestingly enough. So living in Rome I really understood what those looks were about, because I was probably the darkest person there back in '94 or something like that. You know, you just didn't see a whole lot of mixed ethnicity. And yeah, I hung out at Dave's place, and for a while it was slow, but eventually it led to me getting my first major published work, which was Green Lantern, an issue, a fill-in with Green Lantern, which led to doing 5 or 6 issues of Superboy, which then sort of started that ball rolling of doing work at DC, where I was for about 4 years.
Not bad.
Yeah, I don't complain. It was good.
So you're DC for a while, then you jump to Marvel.
DC, and then I was living, like I said, where Dave was. Dave then he reinvents himself, and he leaves, and he moves back to Atlanta. So I'm sitting here in Rome going, what the hell am I doing in Rome if Dave Johnson's not up here? And Rome is about an hour north of Atlanta.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I guess logistically I should move to Atlanta. And from there, I was still eking out all of this DC work. I was doing a lot of specials, nothing to really sink my teeth into, but here's specials and whatnot. It wasn't until I joined Gaijin Studios in 1999 that I started working for Marvel, because again, this was a studio. They said, we can't get you work, but we can definitely talk to people. And a guy named Mike Martz, one of the editors, Mike Martz, who funny enough is an editor now here at the company I'm working for now, Aftershock. Mike was an editor over at Marvel for many, many years. And he knew some of the guys. He didn't know me. And I introduced myself and talked to him. And he was doing a book that was going to be coming out. And they were going to really, really push this. It was called Bishop, the Last X-Man, which would put Bishop in some sort of an alternate timeline. Very much Lord of the Rings, I found out later. And I had to actually... I had to audition for that book. They never tell you who you're auditioning with, but I always was curious, who did I beat out to actually get this book? Because I did eventually get the book.
Yeah.
And I stayed on that for maybe 12, 13 issues. So almost a year and a half I was there. And then from there, I just sort of skipped along. Bishop and Gambit had a limited miniseries. And then Gambit, the book, became available, and Mike was editing that. So he said, hey, if you want to come over on Gambit. I did that for about 2 years. And that's, of course, like I said, they canceled that outright. So from there, I was sort of flailing around and just kind of going from book to book to book. From there, I think there was sort of a no man's land for a little while. And my rent at Gaijin was very, very high. So it was like paying two rents a month. One for the apartment I was living in, and then another for where I was. And I just did a lot of miniseries, a lot of fill-ins. Funny enough, everybody at Gaijin had this book or this company they were doing with Dark Horse called Blank Noir. They were going to set the industry on fire because Jason Pearson was doing something called Body Bags. Brian Stelfreeze had something called High Velocity. Everybody basically had a book. Cully Hamner was going to have a book coming out called Brave. Jason Martin had something. Carl Story had something. Body Bags and High Velocity were the only two. That and, oh God, there's somebody's name I'm forgetting right now, and forgive me for that. But though there were only 3 books that eventually came out. And unfortunately, that Blank Noir never went anywhere. And I technically never did work for Dark Horse at that time. Of course, I would later meet up with them in '97 when Buffy came around. Mm-hmm. So I was just getting work where I could. And I was very frugal with my money because, when you come up from nothing, you know exactly what that feels like. So anything I could save, I was definitely, I was enjoying the high times, and I was preparing for the low times, as Kenny Rogers once said to me.
Yeah.
There you go.
And
so when do you and Buffy find each other?
Me and Buffy find each other. I didn't know the extent of this story, funny enough, until a couple of years ago. I was working on The American Way, and The American Way was an 8-issue miniseries that probably took me a year. So I started it late 95, maybe 96. with a writer-director, John Ridley, of course, who recently, or a couple of years ago, won the award for Best Screenplay for 12 Years a Slave. But this was way before that. He had done a bunch of stuff before that. And he was a CNN commentator and things. So he had a lot of street cred.
Mm-hmm.
And he loved comics. He had done a couple of comics with Image. He wrote The Authority. He wrote a couple of issues of Authority for their book at the time.
Yeah.
But he really wanted to do something. And Wildstorm was at that, I don't know if Wildstorm was a part of DC, but they were slowly starting to merge with DC around that time. So I got a call from a guy named Ben Abernathy who says, I don't know how, I don't know if John really saw my work, but I know Ben was familiar with it. And it's funny because I was looking for work at DC and I was up for The Flash. Now, when somebody offers you a book that has a lot of prominence, like The Flash, and then somebody calls you about a book where they're like, well, it's a book about superheroes, but you don't know any of the superheroes. They're all made up, and this would be something that wouldn't have a high profile because there's no Superman, no Batman, no nothing in there. I said, well, you know what? I don't know. If they give me Flash, I'm probably going to take it, but send me the script. Let me read it. Let me see what it's like, and we'll go from there. And I read the script and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. I thought to myself, if I don't draw this book, this is a book I'm going to buy and read because it is so good just in its written form. It took some cajoling, and John Ridley actually called and said, dude, I love what you do. I've seen your work. Please, you will be glad you did this. You know, when history says whatever, there will have been other people on The Flash, but you will always be remembered for the American way. And I really did take that to heart. So I took a leap and did that. And 8 issues of that, which is what the miniseries was, apparently, Joss Whedon, of course, who's a big comic book fan, that was a book that he was reading. Joss is one of those guys, he flies a lot, so he likes to take something with him to read, and he loves comic books. So he's usually asking somebody, hey, what's the big thing to read?
Yeah.
And somebody gave him my book. And from there, when he finally got the wild hair to do Buffy and do it as a season 8, a direct succession from the TV show, he was saying, this might be Providence or what, but I was reading this book. I don't know this guy, but I really like his work. And I think this is the guy we need. And he was talking to Scott Alley at the point and saying all this. And Scott, of course, didn't know who I was either. And to his credit, Scott was very, hey, I've got other people, though. No, I've got people we can do. I'm Scott Alley. I can get you Mike Mignola to do the covers if you want, or I can get you this, I can get you that. And Joss, I will always be indebted to Joss. Joss was like, no, let's try this guy first, because I really see something here that I think he can bring to it. And probably the best compliment he ever did was a year into the book. He said, I knew I made the right decision when I picked you, because all I have to do now is sit back and watch you create the magic. I don't have to micromanage you, which he felt every time I do a comic book, I feel like I'm micromanaging to get my vision out there. But he's like, you get it. You get exactly what I'm trying to do. That's why I'm so hands off with you. So, and then I did Buffy, for about 8 years. And then, Joss, of course, was saying, well, hey, I've got this other little book called Firefly. I don't know if you're interested in that, but I'd love for you to do a couple of issues in there. And I'm like, are you kidding me, buddy? Let's do this. All right. So there, and then he's like, do you want to come back to Buffy? And that basically solidified my long, long history with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I have no complaints in my career. If my career ends as soon as COVID does, I have no qualms whatsoever. I've had a really good career, and it's made me successful and allowed me to do what I love to do.
I think that you've got a lot of gas in your tank, my friend. So
let's hope it's not just from that chicken I ate.
Really, I mean, absolutely. You are the Carl Barks of Buffy and comics. There's no question for that. And that's not. I don't say that in a joking way. I'm saying there's a legitimate compliment. But okay. Absolutely, you've got a lot of stuff ahead of you.
And Joss has had some. I mean, not just Joss, but Dark Horse had a lot of really talented people working on those books. I
Yeah. Well, everybody wanted to come in. Nobody wanted to do the interiors because that was too much of a commitment. But people loved to come in and do covers and whatever else that they could just do a little bit of. They were more than happy to do. But, when it came down to actually doing the legwork and all of that, hours and hours of doing it, surprisingly, you found a lot of people who are like, no, I think I'm going to stick with doing some covers or some pinups or this and that. And while I do think I was good at what I was doing, again, this is where that discipline stuff came in. They understood that, hey, this guy is actually creating the work and we're getting it out in this sort of a time frame. There's a lot to be said for that 80% of discipline against that 20% of talent. So I think a lot of that, and I tell a lot of new guys, if you're disciplined or you learn that discipline early on, it will serve you the rest of your career.
Absolutely. So one other unique thing about the Buffy series was that it was the first comic book series that took place either during or after another media property that it was full 100%. This is canon.
Well, it was, to my knowledge, it was the first book because Dark Horse had already been publishing Buffy while the show was on. So they were publishing concurrently. And they were doing it with whatever the show was doing at the time.
Yes.
But it was never considered canon.
Yes.
Until Joss had the great idea. Buffy went 7 seasons on television. And then he thought, well, hey, why don't we do season 8 and beyond in comic book format? And to my knowledge, that was like the first time that was officially done in a comic book. Now, of course, you see it everywhere. But that was the first time it was being done.
Generally, you're just dealing with a licensor.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, you know what? You just got to get us to this point.
Mm-hmm. And everything's got an asterisk next to it, or it's the fans will say, "Oh, it's expanded universe," or what Well,
all
Star Wars fans.
All credit to Joss. Believe me, it was because he was so involved in the property that season 8 actually meant something, because he was so interested in doing this, he treated it like he filmed his season on Buffy. Yeah. He basically said, okay, what I usually do when I do Buffy in the TV show, I come in at the beginning, I write it, then I might come in the middle, and then I'll come in at the end and finish it off. He's like, that's what I'm going to do. And he went and contacted everybody who ever wrote for the TV series and asked them if they'd like to come in and write for the comic book. And half of them had never written a comic book, but they loved the property so much, they jumped at the chance to actually write more of this Buffy canon that they were so interested in. And of course, as you know, so many of those people have gone on to other, now I won't say bigger and better things, they have gone on to other things that has kept their name out there these days.
Well, just that show had a very deep writing bench.
And
yeah. A lot of them went up there too. And I remember again, full confession, I wasn't a huge Buffy guy. I knew a lot.
Well, neither was I.
Yeah, but I remember.
It's all right. I was enough of a Buffy fan for all of us.
Good, you little pervert.
But I knew plenty of people who did, and when I read and going on, oh, this is officially canon. I remember telling all my Buffy friends, I'm like, no, this is Joss Whedon. This really is. If he could film it, he would. But this is the real McCoy. So I was spending all my Buffy friends in the direction of it. So,
and that's what he told everybody who came on to write the show. This is the Buffy we always wanted to do. So write your teleplay or your comic script as if we had an unlimited budget, and don't even think about where we had to break down or not do certain things. He's like, write it as if you always wanted to write this in a Buffy episode, and that's where we had a giant Dawn or a Mechadon, or we had other worldly things. We had other dimensions. There was a nice team up with Frey, which was Joss's Slayer from the future, and things he could have never done on the television show.
Yeah,
I tell you, I didn't know a man who at that time was happier than him, because he was so enjoying what he was doing. And he confided in me once saying, you know why I love this so much? It's because it's just you and me. I'm not dealing with the company. I'm not dealing with the studio. I'm not dealing with actors. I'm not dealing with, set locations. All of these things, which is, necessary evils that you have to deal with. But he loved the idea that it's just you and me and we're both creating this thing, and it's going on from here. So
when at the beginning you said that he was just feeling you out, so maybe his scripts were very detailed, but so they get less and less, so it went more to a plot. Buffy goes on in, talks to Willow, they grab some weapons and they leave, and that'd be it.
And that was another huge compliment, actually. Yeah, I mean, his scripts were never like Alan Moore in The Watchmen, of course, but his scripts
3 pages on one panel.
Exactly. But because he didn't know me, of course, you have to write a little more to get it across what you want from your artist. Even so much so, by the 3rd issue, it really tapered off and bottomed out. And I thought, am I doing something wrong? Did I piss this guy off? Why isn't he writing as much anymore? What's going on? And I asked him, I'm like, Josh, you don't have to go to Scott or my editor or anything. You can come to me. If I did something wrong, give me the opportunity to make amends for it. And he's like, no, dude, I'm not writing so much because I don't have to. You get it. You know exactly what you're doing. And I'm like, oh, dude, well, if that's the case, then that's probably one of the best compliments you could have ever given me.
Great.
So, yeah, that's why he loved it so much.
So are you, at this point in your career, you feel very comfortable with maybe a leaner script, more plot driven as opposed to heavy duty?
I'm okay. Honestly, I don't see myself as an artist as much as I see myself as a storyteller. And yeah, I wouldn't shy away from an Alan Moore script. Like you said, that was maybe 3 pages on one panel. I am very interested in what the story is saying, and all of those words are pretty much for the artist. Obviously, the reader is never going to see that sort of thing. So being the first reader, if you will, I don't mind that sort of thing because I personally love comics, and if it's a good comic, I love reading it. And if it's long, all the better. I don't mind. Mm-hmm. When it comes time to, and it's funny, you mentioned Watchmen. When it comes time to actually illustrate a book, I will take a script, and very much like Dave Gibbons did with Watchmen, I'll just highlight all these little areas that I actually need for that particular page, and all of the other superfluous stuff, which was nice reading, I don't necessarily need it. I just don't bother with it at all. So I just highlight all the important stuff and then move on from there. So that was an important lesson I learned, just reading comics.
And that's a very good point too, because every writer in this business, every veteran writer definitely has their own distinct flavor. There's, unlike screenwriting or playwriting or whatever, there's never really been a unified, here's a comic book script writing method, even if it's just full script or panel plot breakdown. So,
well, they used to. Yeah, Marvel used to have that. They called it the plot script was the Marvel style, and then DC was the more verbalized, which I kind of preferred because in the DC version, they actually included dialogue. And I'm very big on, as I'm a storyteller, I want my actors to act in the story. And if I know what they're saying, it makes it a lot easier. I could do Buffy with my eyes closed because the dialogue was so authentic to what you saw on television. It was basically a piece of pie just to kind of come in, read the dialogue and go, yeah, I know exactly what Willow would do or what Buffy would do or Xander in that situation. So it was so easy.
It's big. Yeah, there's comfort in that, and
very much.
And you see that too. I mean, and again, it's very envious to be on a book that long and get to that comfort level and get to that rapport. And nowadays, guys are on a book, 8, 12 issues, go on or whatever. I really miss the days from our era when there would be just solid runs. And whether you're a fan of it or not, me too, I was very comfortable with Jim Aparo on Batman for 15 years.
I'm not the biggest Aparo fan. He stayed too long.
Yeah, probably. But what it is that you got acclimated. You knew what you were in for when you got the book.
Sure.
I'll play counterpoint. I think that yes, there are great runs. You think of Byrne on Fantastic Four, you think of Simonson on Thor, you think of Miller on Daredevil, and these people have great runs. But I also think that there is, as Georges may have pointed out, there are some people who kind of hang around a little bit too long. And and just my own personal opinion is that I think, especially with when it comes to writers, I think that a lot of writers have some really great ideas for characters, but after a few years, you've kind of done everything you're going to do with the character, and you could be a great writer, you could be a creative person, but you're just tapped out on that book. And the same thing now with an artist. You do something, and after a while, you're taking shortcuts. You're kind of bored. You draw Batman you draw Batman the first year or two. It's exciting. You're drawing Batman. It's new. It's fresh. You get to do all the villains. 10 years in, you've done all the villains. How many times are you going to draw the Joker? How many times?
No, you're absolutely right, because even Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on Fantastic Four, right around issue 70, you could see they were sort of just retelling old stories that they had set up already. Not to say they should have left, but even that sort of a super dream team can get to a point where you're like, even Alan Moore on Swamp Thing, which he stayed for about, 50 or so issues. After a while, I think it looked like he said to himself, you know what, I've gone as far as I can go with this.
Well,
and
on Fantastic Four, the kinetic energy is crackling by issue 48. Mm-hmm. Issue 52, in the 40s and 50s, it's just crackling with energy. And then you get to the 60s and you're like, oh, we've done the Inhumans. We've done,
Dr. Strange or Dr. Doom.
We've done Doom. We've done this all. And then you start to not really have those new bold concepts anymore.
Mm-hmm. And mind you, I'm sure Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were spreading themselves thin because, of course, they were busy creating all the other Marvel Universe characters.
There's a thing I refer to it as the protracted trimester, when it looks like whether it's artist or writer. I'm more sensitive to it from a writing standpoint, where I feel like somebody had a plan, but maybe the book took off or something like that. And so 3/4 of the way into it, they're kind of dragging it out a little further.
I think
The Sopranos was a big thing about that. It was 2 seasons they were treading water.
George, do you ever read Mark Waid's Flash?
I started when he started it. Yeah, I didn't end it.
So in the beginning, he starts to build up a bit of steam, and the first couple of stories, the first issues are great. Does that Return of Barry Allen story, hits a full head of steam. The stuff, he clearly had that story in his head, clearly had a story he wanted to tell. Then he does Impulse, creates Impulse. We get the Impulse story, and then you get to issue 100, and then by then it's like, oh, okay. Not to say Mark Waid isn't a phenomenal writer, not to say he doesn't do great work, but you can just kind of see the petering. And I think that's a perfect example of a book where it's like, okay, let's shake things up.
I think very, very few people know when to leave. And not that you should. I mean, it's said if somebody is good or a team is good, you want them to be there forever. But I think Frank Miller was very cognizant of, okay, this is where I go because I can't do much. And I don't think you find a lot of that in comic or back then, because it seems nobody even wants to stay on a book past 4 issues nowadays.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah. But back then, they were people, because even Walt Simonson's run on Thor, after a while, I was like, yeah, this is still good, but it's not as, or like you said, Burns on Fantastic Four, or Wolfman and Perez on Titans. They were all good, and not that any of them, I think, suffered, but you could tell, okay, there's a time where it is, and then there's a time where you might say, let's take a break.
So 100,000 copies on Buffy, issue 1.
It went into 4 printings, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I got to get you a T-shirt that says, my comic sold 100,000 copies, and all I got was this T-shirt.
Well, I did get some royalties, too, so they weren't that bad off. But it was so beautiful to see the, what was it, the comic guide, and it shows you where every comic ranks for that month. And Buffy was consistently in the 20s and 30s, which floored me. Obviously, it was never, number 1, but it was consistently in the 20s and 30s, which was amazing. Out of supposedly 300 comics that they counted every month, Buffy was up there, at least in my run, up pretty high for a book like that.
So so now post Buffy. So you.
Oh, I tell you, things got low, Mike.
Yeah.
I just had to walk around and solicit myself for caricatures.
Well, you're a handsome man. You can make money on those Atlanta streets.
I sit down. I'll draw your dog for 50 cents. Please, I'll draw your car. Let me do something.
Downtown Atlanta in front of the Renaissance.
No, it never got that bad. But I will say that if I had a height, for sure, it was definitely the Buffy and Serenity by extension. Because funny enough, Dark Horse would tell me, actually, Serenity sells better than Buffy when we do all of this. So when I was on Serenity, in a weird way, because they said their distribution was bigger, I had more exposure on Serenity than I did on Buffy, which I never understood that. But hey, okay. But post Buffy,
is it because with Firefly they were putting out, with Serenity they were putting out the graphic novels in stores, in bookstores?
I think so. Because of that, they could get it into the Barnes and Noble and all of the other bookstores, and get it into bookstores abroad, because not too many people or shops or whatnot would sell the individual issue regardless of the country. They were more interested in the collection.
Right.
So Serenity would sell more.
Because Serenity always came out as those hardcovers.
Yeah, exactly. Or it was only maybe 4 or 5 issues and then collected, whereas Buffy was considered an ongoing. So I think that it kind of had a little bit of a stigma to people who are like, well, we only sell books in my store, so give me the volumes. I don't want the individual issues, just the volumes.
All right, so you do 8 years on Buffy, and then that time ends. Now, 2 questions. What did you do immediately after that? And did working on that book for 8 years for Dark Horse affect you from getting other higher profile stuff?
Now, yeah, that's an interesting question. What I did after I worked on Buffy, like all the other sports players, I went to Disney World and had a great time. But then, yeah, I think you're right, because I spent so much time in a non-superhero book that was in the business, but basically off to the side. I really do feel it affected my presence in the Marvel's DC superhero arena, that, believe it or not, I really did have to audition again. I was really lucky. I can't remember the editor's name on Batwoman, but I was very lucky on Batwoman. She was a huge Buffy fan. And she's like, what's it going to take to get you to start drawing Batwoman? Because I want that. What you do on Buffy, I want that for Batwoman. Okay. And I said, well, all you have to do is ask, and I'm there. So that's how I got that Batwoman gig. And then from there, everything just kind of was happenstance. Buffy was a great it's almost like that aging writer or actor who did these great things when they were younger, but now they're really just good for dinner parties and social stories. I felt I was becoming more that guy that, well, it's good to have him under our umbrella, but let's not consider him for the really big stuff. So I think in a way it hurt me that I never got to do the X-Men or, Spider-Man or Batman or anything that was really full and front. I was always doing stuff, or people were much happier with me doing stuff that was on the peripheral, because of my time on Buffy sort of gave me that animosity towards doing superhero books.
Yeah,
it's a weird psychological thing.
You were kind of looked on as the old reliable, in the sense of, he's great, he'll do whatever, put him on the too, but yeah.
Right, but he hasn't done any of the Batman stuff or the X-Men stuff.
Right, and I also think that
they haven't seen it, know.
Right, when you kind of jump out of that Marvel DC hamster wheel.
It's a boys' club. Don't get it wrong. It's a boys' club where if somebody likes you in there and you're doing well in that little bubble, you have to stay in that bubble, because if you get out, and there are the exceptions, you can have your Terry Dodsons or your Dave McNiven or, anybody like that who can go over and do other stuff. But basically, once you're out of that bubble, you're out of that boys' club. And there's always somebody else right behind you who's younger and better than you are, who's willing to take a lot less money and come in and do the work as well.
A lot less money. Yeah, but I think, and I tell you this all the time, I think that as an artist, I mean, you're phenomenal. You're an incredible artist. I don't know that people have given you the work to really show off. You know, you just did that Captain America book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And the pencils on that were stunning.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with you. I like the idea of what you say better than me. So
yeah, no,
and
you know, somebody who has seen your entire career, literally from the first book you ever did that I had in the store I worked at on the shelf, and it was like, oh, it's this local guy, you know. And
please burn that, by the way, when you get through with this.
I don't have a copy of Dogs of War. I haven't seen a copy of Dogs of War in probably 30 years.
Okay.
But I remember, and then to have seen your I know we've talked about this before, to have seen you grow into, you know, where you are today has been an amazing, you know, to watch.
Yeah.
And I do think that, you know, your best years are still ahead of you. You're still, you know, you're still improving. You're incredible as you are, but you keep getting, you know, and I don't say that about a lot of artists. You know, a lot of artists hit a point and then they kind of just coast. And I've never seen that with you. I just see you increasing your craft.
You know, because I've always sort of pitted myself against it's funny, at the time that Image was successful, all of the Image guys, or the people who followed all the Image guys, were coming up saying, oh, I want to be like McFarlane, or I want to draw like, you know, so-and-so. Mm-hmm. I was always telling myself, I want to be like Michael Golden. I want to be like Walt Simon. I want to be like these guys.
Those are,
who, in my opinion, these people will be here when all of these other guys are long gone. And that's who I set my particular. It's like somebody who's a musician and says, oh, I want to be like Ed Sheeran. I'm like, well, I don't want to be so much like Ed Sheeran. I want to be like Marvin Gaye. I want to have a history where people are going to remember that. I mean, not, you know, bad mouthing Ed Sheeran or anything like that, but that was my goal, to be more like the people like Art Adams.
So all right. So tell us, who were the influences on you as an artist? Who have you looked at and gone, these are the guys? So you said Art Adams.
All those guys. And I think I was in high school at a great time, because when I was in high school, it was the early to mid 80s. And there was, you know, Frank Miller on Daredevil. There was Walt Simonson on Thor. There was Perez on the Teen Titans. There was Mike Grell. I loved Green Arrow. I'd never really gotten into the character, but when Mike Grell took it over, I thought this was amazing. All of these guys, Alan Davis, honestly, and I don't give credit too freely, but I always thought Alan Davis would have made a perfect successor to Jack Kirby, because in his particular heyday, his creativity, and you know how Jack could just create a new character just pulling it out of his ass, and it looked amazing. If you look at Alan Davis's career, a lot of his strengths were in characters, and this guy just drew. He wasn't about ego and said, well, no, I can only draw the Wolverine book and I'm only going to draw 4 of them and leave it at that. This guy understood, I'm a working artist, and if you like my work, that's great. And that's something I admire when I finally did meet Michael Golden. Because I put Michael Golden in a pedestal that I didn't hold anybody else to, because I was like, I don't know anybody who could draw like this. This was the unattainable. This to me was my Rockwell or my Rembrandt. And when I met him, I was very shocked, because in my head, I was building his ego up to being this guy. And he would just tell me, I'm a working artist. And no better way to show that. Every show that I ever did with Michael, or he was there when he was supposed to be, at whatever, 10 o'clock, whenever the show started. And he was there when the show was over at 7 or whenever. And I was like, oh my God, Mike, you're one of those guys, you can leave whenever the hell you want. He's like, yeah, but this is when they asked me to be here, and this is when they asked me to leave. So I'm a working artist. He never had an ego about, I mean, he's still around, obviously, but he never had an ego about his talent. And that to me always impressed the hell out of me. And I'd like to think in my career, I've never had an ego about what I do. And the idea that I do it is, I think, you know, praise enough, at least for myself.
Yeah. Alan Davis, that's a pretty good, comparing Alan Davis to, he could have been, and I think still be a contender to Kirby's crown, because Davis to me was energy. There was this wonderful energy,
dynamics,
that never overstepped the narrative. Mm-hmm. Everything always served the narrative too, but everything was popped, and everything just had gravity. And Mike Golden, of course, to me, with him, it's always gravity. he draws characters that exist in a world where there's gravity. You know, whether it's somebody with sagging cheeks or just the way the clothes.
No, you're right. His stuff had weight to it.
Yes,
there was very much a weight to it, and as a result, there was that sense of realism to what he did, and not just in the characters. Mike was one of those guys. If you look at anything he does, so many artists just want the accolades, and they're really good, and they want to draw a really cool pose of Wolverine. But Mike will say, I want to draw Wolverine, but there is a band of Nazis with Sherman tanks behind him, forcing their way on him. You're like, Mike, you don't have to draw all that much. But he's the kind of guy, yeah, but wouldn't that make a really cool cover? And he will take that time that another artist who didn't have to would take him 4 hours. It will take Mike to do that for 20 hours. But you're looking at it going, oh my God, this is why you're in a class by yourself.
Paul just commented this in the comments that Alan Davis is great, but to this day, he still gives all his characters 1980s haircuts.
You're not wrong.
You know, there are artists, look at Kirby. There are artists who were of their time. And as good as they were, you can definitely see where they were in time. Because I do agree with you, but that's only because that's how they grew up. So for so long, and you brought up Jim Aparo, Patty, that I was pissed off at Jim Aparo that he was still drawing Batman in these, like soul-covered heels. And he was just drawing him in a very 70s way where, whatever, the Tim Burton Batman had come out, and it's like Batman is more of a Black Ops kind of a guy.
Right.
He's not in these soul, these little 70s shoes.
Yeah, he was still the very, very 70s bright blue Batman. You're not wrong.
And Patty and I think we've talked about this. I mean, we're reading Batman after the movie comes out, and that Batman is in the comics is very much of the before the movie Batman. And I really didn't. I guess Kelly Jones is the first artist on Batman where I felt like this is a modern take on Batman. I felt everything else was still 10 years behind, and not counting Miller. Miller's a different story.
Sure.
The actual core, I guess Miller was on the book, and then that was the early 400s. Then you get Aparo's back, and then some other artists. But I really, when Kelly Jones had the book, I was like, oh, this is an interesting, modern take on him.
I think it's a little bit after Kelly Jones, Brayfogle.
Norm.
Yeah. I really dug his style. I thought.
Yeah. Well, even Alan Davis did a great run with Mike Barr on Batman, which was more nostalgic because they brought back all the old stuff.
That was the year 2 thing, right? Was that year?
That was the year 1.
This was Detective Comics.
Detective Comics, right? It was the one with the gun.
Right. That was his 500 or what is it? 500th issue of Detective, I believe.
No, there were two different runs. There was the Barr and Davis had a run on Detective Comics, which was incredibly solid. It was pre-Crisis. It was the Mad Hatter, but it was the red mustache.
The Riddler cover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was great.
When they heel turned Catwoman again, Joker brain wiped her out, and she became a full blown villainess again. It was great. And then Alan Davis came in on year 2 because McFarlane ditched after 2 issues.
Yeah.
Oh no! I take that back. Alan Davis was on the first.
Davis ditches,
and then Todd
McFarlane came in. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
But those
which I couldn't understand. How do you go from Alan Davis to Todd McFarlane? I didn't get that.
Ask Alan. that must.
Well, they needed somebody to get on the book who could do it and who had a modernish style. And DC had McFarlane. He had done Infinity Incorporated, and he hadn't gone to Marvel yet. He was still a DC guy. And who else did DC have at the time that could do the book?
Yeah. See.
So all right. So what's on your bucket list? What books do you want to do?
That would be a fair question if it were 10 years ago. But now with everybody self-publishing, I don't even know people ask that question anymore. Because I've always wanted to grow up. I loved the Fantastic Four growing up. That was my book. When I was a kid, The Thing was just my guy. Marvel 2-in-1, I was there every month. I didn't care if it was good or bad. I did not like Ron Wilson's work at all, but I was there every damn month. But you can't say that to anyone now because they've got their own IP, of course, and they've got their own thing that they want to do. And, Image is giving them this thing or Skybound is doing something for them that nobody asks that question anymore. Like, do you want to draw the X-Men or do you want to draw Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman? I always said I would love to draw Wonder Woman. Having done Buffy, I think it would be really cool to see what the Buffy artist does on Wonder Woman and how that book would be affected. And I would love it because, of course, as you know, Joss was supposed to direct Wonder Woman back in '97 when that was still a thing. I would have loved to have seen him do the book.
All right, so we got to convince somebody at DC to let Joss write a Wonder Woman comic and have you draw it. See,
I don't think that would be too hard. It's just getting Joss would be the hard part.
Indeed. Yeah, that'd be. I'm surprised at this point they haven't asked him to just basically adapt his script into like a one shot.
Well, he's doing something for HBO. He's got that limited series something with HBO with it's like femininity and woman power and all that in the 18th century or something like that. So it follows a woman kind of not. I don't think it's about Jack the Ripper or anything like that, but very much in that time.
That Victorian era.
Yeah, almost Gotham by Gaslight type of mentality.
But there is one thing we have on your bucket list that we have to do.
Oh, you kidding, Mike? You keep giving me a stiffy every time you mention it, but then we never go anywhere with it.
Planet of the Apes is our jam.
I would love to do that. I would have to have some sort of specifics. I know there's no logistical way of saying, let's just stay within the confines of maybe the first two films. But I would that would be a dream. Every day I'd come going, oh my God, I'd love to do this.
Patty and I were talking and he sent me a copy. Patty, the script. Do you know about the script for the Planet of the Apes movie that they were going to make in the 80s or the early 90s?
With Tim Burton or
the one that Taylor's actually in it? Yeah, this was around late 90s, early double aughts. Alan Rifkin wrote it when he was doing it around two. And the idea was it was going to be a direct sequel to the original one. Charlton Heston was going to come back.
What?
And he was going to be there just enough time to get killed off so his son would go, no, and all that. But,
all right, it was 88, Patty. It was 88.
88? Wow.
Alan Rifkin. Fox brought in Alan Rifkin to pitch ideas. And he wanted to do a Planet of the Apes. He did a Planet of the Apes script called Return to the Planet of the Apes. And it takes place after Ape Civil War that put a guerrilla general in power and brought about the Roman era of ape civilization. And then a descendant of Charlton Heston's, Taylor, named Duke, would be the main character who was raised by Cornelius and rose to defy the ape empire that killed Taylor through fighting in the arena. And
so would this discount the second film, or they would just go
completely discount the second film?
Yeah, it was just ignored all the sequels and went to the.
You kind of got to discount the second film because they blew up the planet.
Yeah, there's no going forward. Yeah,
I'd love to see somebody do an adaptation of Rod Serling's original idea for Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Beneath.
Beneath, which would have been still in the second one. It wouldn't have been nuking the Earth, but what it would have been was, I think the last version that he touched involved more astronauts were coming over. At one point, Taylor finds a plane and he soups it up and gets it on the air again. And what really basically at the end, there's a nuke, but it doesn't blow up the world. It blows up all the evil mutants and the asshole gorillas, and then all the remaining apes and humans decide let's be pals. And then it picks up like 10 years later, and then out in the Forbidden Zone, there's a huge explosion, and these army of mutant apes with all these war machines they've been building underground oozes on out. So it's like, that would be like smash cut, and it'll be the end for, okay, the mutants and the apes kind of get together and form their own army.
All right, that sounds like a Secret Wars type of a thing for me, where I'd love to keep it more in that little ape village, or just explore that whole area. Or
my thing is, what else is out there? You've got
exactly.
Ape City, right, which is this little small encampment But what's out there? What else? Mm-hmm. What else is out there that
Which, because if you ever thought about it geographically, they are probably near. Obviously, they have to be near New York,
yes.
So they're more towards the East Coast. So there are certain areas they could be. But you're right, the temperate zone alone would have affected some sort of evolution if they went up to Canada, or maybe they go down to Florida. There could be a different type of ape evolution.
There's the 70s Marvel black and white magazines kind of went into that.
Thank you very much. I have them all.
Yes, well, then you know this too. Like they meet like the crazy Robin Hood ape.
Right. Yeah.
They go to Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, and where he's from, all the humans can talk, and everybody's moderately cool with each other. So that ape society just was in their own little bubble, so to speak.
Well, I mean, that's legitimate, because remember in the first movie, Zeus, you get the idea that he actually realized, I know you guys can talk. I just am trying to keep it on the down low, and I'm trying to eradicate you guys because I'm the keeper of the faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
So see, it's already starting to form. Look at that. Mike, what are we doing here? Come on.
We got to get the rights.
Rights, Mike. Isn't it better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission? Come on.
So also, Georges, you just did a project sort of with me. My buddy Terry is doing a graphic novel called The Healing. Mm-hmm. And so he got a bunch of his friends to write some chapters, and he drugged me in, and I wrote this little the ending, I guess. I wrote the ending.
Which is ironic, Mike, because until we said something at a show just this past year, I didn't know you were actually writing it. I thought it was just something where you were helping him along, and you were throwing your name around to get all of us guys who are indebted to you to go, all right, fine, I'll help you out.
No, he got me, nailed me down, and I fleshed it out with him, and then there was another artist that I thought I was going to be working with who couldn't do the project, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to go get Georges in on this, and it was written specifically for this other artist who's used to 92 panels on a page.
I think I know who you mean. Yes.
So, it was written with that person in mind. So then when we switched to you, we had to expand it a little to give you a little bit more breathing room, because you're not used to working within very confined.
Well, I hate to say it. When you've got multiple characters, that is an awful way to tell a story, because you can never show the breadth of what you're doing because you've got 9-10 panels on a page. There's no way, unless you're combining all those panels. You're never telling the breadth of an ensemble piece. If it's just one guy, if it's just Daredevil doing what he's doing, then that's fine. But when it's an ensemble piece, no.
And you, did an amazing job on it. It's beautiful stuff.
Thank you, sir. I had the great Carl Story inking, and he's always great.
Phenomenal. And you, there are some inkers who enhance your work, and then there are other inkers who, don't do as good of a job. Carl is one of the good ones. Carl did a good job on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's going to be coming out. Well, Terry did the Kickstarter for it. It's called The Healing. It's going to be coming out very soon.
And the Kickstarter was successful.
Yes,
I think that's important to know.
It was funded, and there's a lot of great artists attached to it. You're not the only big name on it.
No, I know David Williams is a good friend of mine, and he was showing me his pages, so I thought that was nice.
Barry Kitson's on the book. Who else is on the book? I know Derek Donovan just did some pages for it.
Derek did, yeah. Barry Kitson. Who did I see? Is it Brayfogle? Is Brayfogle on there?
Is Brayfogle on the book? Hang on, I just pulled up.
Norm Brayfogle passed away a couple of years ago.
Did he?
Yeah.
Or Val Semix. I'm sorry, not Brayfogle.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Yes. Alex Saviak's on the book. Val Mayer's on the book. Derek Donovan.
Right.
And David Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And just going down the...
Yeah, it's a nice looking book. I haven't because I only did my part in it, but I haven't read the whole thing.
Mike Barron wrote a chapter. James Hudnall wrote a chapter before he passed. His chapter's done by Sergio Carrillo.
Yeah.
David Williams, Ben Herrera did a chapter. Val Mayerick, Alex Saviak did John Taddeo's chapter. Frank Fosco, Drew Garassi. And then there's you and Carl, Chuck and Derek. The late Alan Bellman did a pinup for it.
Alan, really? Wow.
Yeah. So, it'll be a nice package. It'll be a nice...
now, you were saying, when is that supposed to come out, though?
I think it's coming out later this month. This month, next month.
So I don't know all the Kickstarters who got it. That it's coming out for them, or it's being solicited
for the Kickstarter people, and then we'll see what happens. I got to talk to Terry. I don't know how the COVID nonsense has held it up. I don't know if he's being able to print or not. So that's there are challenges.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're working on a new project now.
Yeah, I'm doing something for Aftershock, a company. They have been around for a couple of years. Great bunch of guys. They do a lot of IP stuff, though. So everything they do is geared with an eye for television or movies or things like that. And I'm doing something called Shadow Doctor, which is a book about the writer, Peter Galloway, I believe his name, is the grandson of a guy who worked for Al Capone as a doctor back in the 30s. And what made it interesting was that he was a man of color. And Al Capone actually funded his hospital because at the time, nobody was hiring a black doctor. Even though you were educated at Princeton or wherever, nobody was hiring you in their hospital. So essentially, he had to go open his own hospital, but he doesn't have any money. And it's that classic story where selling your soul to the mob allowed him to get the practice he wanted and doing all this. So I believe most of this is autobiographical to an extent, and then some of it is fictional. And I believe it's in a 5-issue miniseries that it doesn't have a release date yet. I'm finishing up the second issue now, but it's very interesting. Yeah, I seem to be pegged for those stories that have some sort of a root in reality, like Buffy and the American Way and all of that stuff. I don't think I'm particularly good at period pieces, but I seem to be doing a lot of period.
And also, you seem to do well with books with different representation.
Yeah. This whole book takes place. Well, most of it takes place in the 30s. So I've been getting all these 30s books of American ads and things like that, and cars, and stuff like that. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot. Very, very. Nobody gives you any accolades for it because they never see just how much work it is. All they are like, I really didn't like that car you drew in the second panel.
Well, I also you're talking about a person of color as your main character,
and right is the main character. Yeah, I believe he's. I don't know if he's full African American, but he was definitely partially. And yeah, it's just his struggle on how to make it as just somebody who's trying to help people. And even then, people refuse your help because of the color of your skin. And of course, I would have loved to have said that sounds asinine to say, but in light of recent events, the idea of systemic racism still being very, very valid today, it floors me. So I don't think it's so weird that somebody wouldn't want their help because you're a different color.
The whole Capone connection, I think, is very fascinating.
Yeah, and that's actually true. Yeah, these were true events that he thinks he's fictionalizing to a certain degree. But
but a lot of truth. I imagine he's asked to do some favors.
Yeah, well, he's essentially working for the mob. He can have his hospital and help his people. Yeah, but as soon as Capone needs something, of course, he's got to drop everything and go over.
And then get this bullet out of this guy and don't ask any questions. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, actually, the third issue opens that way. Actually,
so you had to do some a little bit of research as well, just on like 1930s level of medicine and the implements and crap like that.
Well, since I'm not writing it, I don't have to go that deep. I do have to see what visually, what were nurses looking like, what were hospitals looking like, what would be a recovery room. Certain things that we enjoy now when we go to the hospital, they didn't have back then. And more so if you're going to a black hospital or someone, a little lesser on the scale there. Yeah. It's really almost medieval when you think about it. And this was only not even 100 years ago. So
90 years ago.
Yeah.
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 Wow. I am very intrigued to see where this goes.
Yeah, I hope once I only see the storytelling part that I do. So once it's out of my hands, it's almost like the editing room. Once you make the movie, you actually edit it, and it can turn into something you never thought it might be. So I'm very interested to see what it looks like once it's out on the stands.
Nice.
Thank you. And, I've just been doing commissions otherwise. I had my own Kickstarter early last year or late last year, which was successful. Thank you, Mike, again, for helping me out for my sketchbook. And I've just been, doing a lot of commissions. I've been trying to get my website more self-sustaining. So I've been, doing little stickers and merchandise and stuff like that, just to sort of give people an option to come by and not just click on.
And that would be CaboLounge.com.
And that would be Cabo Lounge, KABALOUNG.com. Anybody who's interested, please feel free. Right? Which one?
GE Lounge.
Yeah, LOUNGE. Yes.
Yes.
Cabo Lounge. Yeah.
KABALOUNGE.
Mm-hmm.
So. What's been the craziest commission you've done?
I don't know if it's crazy as much, but it's funny how people will ask.
Yeah.
For certain things, not knowing if you'll do it. And I've had a bunch of people asking me for Buffy and various lesbian scenes and things like that. At one time, it's funny, I took a guy at his word because I'm not against it. I mean, whatever. Buffy's not a lesbian, although she did sleep with a woman. But it's not something I'm against. I always just thought, I try to keep myself to a certain standard that what if Joss were looking at this? Would he approve of this sort of thing? So one guy actually commissioned me to draw Buffy kissing Willow. And he's like, yeah, I'd love it if they could be kissing. And I was like, oh, okay. I drew it, but I drew it where Willow was kissing Buffy on the cheek. And Buffy was kind of like, well, what are you doing? And he looked at me and was like, well, this isn't really what I wanted, but okay, if this is as far as you're going to go, I guess I have to be happy with this. And I've probably drawn Buffy in a couple of lingeries, I will say. People are really into this, the all there type of thing. So that's probably the craziest ones I've had.
That's fair. That's fair. I suspected it would have been something to do with Buffy, but
And if somebody would like to get a little bit more prudish kind of a sketch from you, they can do that on your website.
They can just come to the website. There's a section there for commissions and all that, and price breakdowns and whatnot. Or you can just contact me directly through the site, or all the instant media stuff we have: Instagram, Twitter, all those. I'm on everything supposedly. So. I am there. Somebody wants to find me, they can do it. God help us all.
You're not that hard to find. I found you.
No, I know. You guys are easy. No detective work here.
Yeah. I don't know. You move around a bit. You go from place to place. One day you're here, one day you're there.
This is true. Well, I'm on the other side of 50 now, so I gotta settle. Yeah. So I said, let me buy a house because I can't keep moving. All of this moving stuff is getting to me. So I'm good. I'm kaput. I'm staying put. I'm not doing anything. I'm gonna do it from here. Leave it at that.
All right. I think we've kept you long enough. We're gonna.
Not at all. This is always great to talk to you guys, and what better way to spend an evening than to talk about comics? Seriously, I couldn't think of anything.
It's been a pleasure.
A pleasure for you guys, Patty, Mike, always. I will tell Jen hello for you when I speak to her, Pat.
Very cool. Yeah, I sent her a text a couple of days ago, but her, she's eternally busy.
That's the Hawkins family lineage. It's there.
Mustn't tell. Agent Hawkins' secret. George,
Ancient Hawkins' secret.
Yeah, indeed. And we absolutely forward to the day when we can go business as normal. Look forward to having you back live in person at
no one more than me.
In front of your fans.
I am totally there. Mike, whenever you got your show, I'm the first one in line, but
I'm
right there.
Trying.
I feel for you, my friend. I'll
tell you some more when we get off the air, when we're backstage again. All right. So next week, Patty, we have John Romita Jr.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And we have, the guest after that that we talked about is probably on board, but we'll
great. So cool. So I hope you guys can join us next week. And Georges, we'll see you soon.
We'll be in touch, so you keep in touch.
Yeah.
Right on. Good night, everybody.
Jude, get us out of here.